the brake line didn't fail. That was the first thing I understood, kneeling on wet asphalt with my hands full of somebody else's blood, 3 seconds before the world went white with sirens. I counted them without meaning to. 4 seconds between the flash and the sound. The car had gone through the guardrail at the curve on Ash Grove Overpass, nose first, and it was burning slow. The kind of burn that meant fuel line, not engine. And underneath the burning, there was a smell I would know blind for the rest of my life. Steel and ozone, and under that, something dark and cold. Like rain on a knife. I had the driver's door wrenched open before I decided to move. I had my hands under her arms before I decided to be brave. She was conscious, barely. Her eyes were the color of glacier water, and they fixed on my face like she was memorizing it in case she didn't get another chance. And she said one word before the world took her under. Wait. I didn't wait. I pulled her free of $11,000 of German steel and laid her on the shoulder of the road and pressed my palm flat over the gash at her hairline. And that was how I met the woman no one had gotten close to in 5 years, flat on my back on a rain-slicked overpass, both of us breathing like we'd forgotten how, her blood on my knuckles, and my whole ordinary life about to end. If you're enjoying stories like this one, take a second to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. My name is Ren Calloway. I was 27 years old. I smelled like brake fluid more often than I smelled like a person, and 6 hours before I pulled a stranger out of a burning car, I had been fired. Not dramatically. Nothing about my life had ever been dramatic. Hale, the owner of Calloway & Son, a name that had stopped meaning anything the day my father died and left half the and son a lie, had called me into the office that used to be my dad's and told me the shop was being sold to a chain that didn't want a mechanic who made the customers uncomfortable. I didn't make customers uncomfortable. I made them correct. I could hear a bad wheel bearing from across a parking lot. I could tell you a transmission was dying before the dashboard knew it. I had been doing it since I was 9 years old, sitting cross-legged on the concrete of my father's bay, handing him sockets before I could reach the pedals of a car myself. And none of that mattered anymore, because I was an Omega who didn't smile enough, and didn't flirt for tips, and didn't apologize for knowing more than the men who brought their cars in. I had $400 in a checking account, a landlord who used the word final in every conversation, and my father's old keychain in my pocket, a small wrench, silver going dull, the one thing of his I'd kept instead of selling. He used to say it while we worked. If you can fix what's broken, you're never truly powerless. He died believing it, on his back under a car that should have been chalked and wasn't, and some nights I hated the words for the lie they'd turned out to be. I was driving home along Ash Grove with my hazards flickering because even my own car had opinions about my life, and that was when I saw the black sedan take the curve wrong. Not skidding, not sliding, but dropping. The rear end sagging in a way that had nothing to do with rain and everything to do with a brake system that had stopped being a brake system. I know the difference between an accident and a failure. I've spent 18 years learning it with my hands. The paramedics got there and peeled me off her because I wouldn't stop pressing gauze to her scalp with fingers that had gone perfectly, professionally steady the way they always did when something was actually wrong. A police officer asked me for a statement, and I gave it. And somewhere in the giving of it, a man in a gray suit arrived out of nowhere, tall silver at the temples, moving like he owned the road they just closed, and crouched by the gurney and said, low enough that he probably didn't think I'd catch it over the radios and the rain, "Is she going to survive it this time?" This time. I filed the sentence away the way I file away a noise an engine makes once, quietly, before it becomes a problem you can't ignore. Then the gurney rolled past me, and the woman with the glacier eyes turned her head against the strap holding her still, found me in the crowd of strangers, and mouthed something I didn't understand yet. Later, I would learn it was my name. She'd have no way of knowing it. She said it anyway, like she already did. I didn't know then that she was Bellamy Ashworth Vance, sole heir to Vance Aeronautical and the coldest name in 3 business journals, a woman the press had taken to calling the widow of Ashgrove Tower after her wife died in a crash on this same stretch of road 5 years ago, almost to the week. I didn't know that no one, not a board member, not a suitor, not a single soul outside 2 employees, had gotten near enough to touch her since. I only knew that her hand had found my wrist on the gurney and held on with a grip like she was the one keeping me from falling, and that when the ambulance doors shut, the cold rain on the overpass suddenly smelled like black pepper and wet asphalt, sharp enough to cut, and underneath the panic of the whole scene, my body had gone warm in a way it had no business going. They wanted to keep me for questioning. Some man in a suit, not the silver-haired one, a younger one with cufflinks that cost more than my rent, asked if I'd be willing to consult on the vehicle's condition for the insurer, since I'd apparently identified something the responding officers hadn't. I said yes, because $400 doesn't stretch, and because something about that brake line was sitting wrong in my stomach like a stone I hadn't swallowed on purpose. I didn't know I was about to hand them the answer to a question 5 years old. I only knew the wreck hadn't smelled like an accident. It had smelled like intent. 3 days later, a car came for me. Not a police car, a long black one, the kind that didn't belong on my block, driven by a man built like a door who introduced himself as Gideon and said almost nothing else the entire ride except, once, checking me in the mirror, "You're smaller than the report made you sound." The report wasn't about my size. No, he agreed. It wasn't. He took me to the Vance impound facility, a warehouse of glass and steel that smelled like money the way other buildings smell like mildew, and there in a private garage bay under lights bright enough for surgery, sat the wreck of the black sedan, roped off, untouched, waiting for someone smarter than the police to look at it. I looked at it. I found the brake line in under 4 minutes, not torn, not worn, scored. A careful half-cut along the inner wall of the hose, the kind of wound that holds together fine on a dry test drive and lets go exactly when heat and pressure build on a long curve in the rain. I found the same signature on a fuel coupling that had no business being loose on a car with 11,000 miles on it. I said all of this out loud to a room that had gone very still, and when I turned around, she was standing in the doorway with a bandage at her hairline and eyes that had lost none of their glacier color, watching me the way you watch a lock finally turning after years of trying the wrong key. "Say that again," she said. "Slowly, I want every word." Her voice had no softness in it and didn't need any. It was the kind of voice built for boardrooms and funerals, calm the way still water is calm right before it closes over your head. I said it again, slower, and pointed with a socket wrench I'd borrowed off a bench because my hands needed something to hold that wasn't nerves. "Somebody wanted this to look random," I said. It wasn't. Whoever did this knew exactly which curve would finish the job, and you're certain. "I've been certain about cars since before I could reach the pedals," I said. "This is the one thing in my life I don't get wrong." Something moved behind her eyes, brief and terrible, gone before I could name it. "Gideon," she said, without looking away from me, "get Miss Calloway a contract. Whatever her current employer pays her, triple it." "I don't have a current employer," I said. "I got fired Tuesday." "Then you work for me starting today," she said, and you will tell no one what you just told me until I say otherwise." A pause, the first uncertain thing I'd see her do. Please, I had been paid to fix cars my whole life. I had never once been paid to keep a secret, and I understood, standing in that garage with the smell of scored rubber and her cold, dark scent settling over both of us like weather, that I had just crossed into a world with entirely different rules, and that the woman offering me the door in wasn't going to let go of my wrist again without a fight. The Vance estate sat on 11 acres behind a gate that opened like it was doing me a favor. Gideon drove me through grounds so tended they looked unreal, past a garage the size of my old shop times 10, 7 cars under fitted covers like sleeping animals, and I understood before I even got out of the car that I had walked into a house built entirely to keep the world at arm's length. Bellamy didn't do a tour. She didn't do small talk either. She walked me through the garage, pointing at each car and telling me, flatly, what was wrong with it, as though she'd been waiting years for someone who'd understand the answer. A vintage roadster with an ignition that stuck, a motor pool sedan with a whine in the differential nobody on staff could place. I diagnosed 4 vehicles in 40 minutes, and she watched me do it with an attention that had weight to it, like a hand on the back of my neck. "You're wasted fixing strangers' commutes," she said, when I straightened up from under the roadster with grease on my jaw. "Somebody has to. Not you. Not anymore." She said it the way she said everything, like a fact rather than an offer. And then, quieter, almost surprised at herself, "Have you eaten today?" I hadn't. I said so before I thought better of it, and 20 minutes later a member of her kitchen staff appeared with a tray that included, absurdly, a small pot of chamomile tea I hadn't asked for, and hadn't mentioned wanting until I realized I'd said it once, offhand, to Gideon in the car. About my father always keeping a box of it in the shop office. She'd been listening. Or she'd made someone listen for her. Either way, it landed somewhere under my ribs and stayed there. The staff didn't share her manners. Desmond Ashworth Vance, her cousin and, as I'd learned, the company's CFO, found me on my second day elbow deep in the roadster's ignition housing and looked at me the way you look at something that's tracked mud onto carpet. "The help doesn't usually eat at the main table," he said, pleasant as a blade. "I assume that's a temporary arrangement. I assume you're wrong a lot and it works out for you anyway," I said, not looking up, and heard Gideon, somewhere behind a stack of crates, make a sound that might have been a laugh choked into a cough. Desmond didn't laugh. He watched me a beat too long, the way you watch a variable you haven't accounted for yet, and left without another word. I didn't think much of it. I should have. That night, Bellamy found me still in the garage at 10, hands full of a stubborn bolt, and instead of dismissing me, she picked up a rag, rolled her sleeves, and held the housing steady while I worked, saying nothing for 10 full minutes. When the bolt finally gave, our hands brushed on the release, and neither of us moved them apart for a second longer than the moment required. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd want something from me." A pause. "You keep fixing things instead." "Maybe that's what I want," I said, and her scent, black pepper, wet stone, something underneath both that I was starting to recognize as restraint, thickened in the small space between us until I felt it on my tongue. "Careful," she said, low. "I don't know how to do this slowly." "Then don't do anything," I said. "Not unless you ask first." She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face cracked open just slightly, like a door finding its hinge after years of rust. "Ask," she repeated, as if testing the shape of the word. "All right. Ren Calloway. May I stay while you finish?" "You may," I said, and the warehouse chill outside the garage bay felt very far away, and I understood the summons that would come the next morning, a black car, a board meeting, her name on a subpoena related to the wreck, was going to matter a great deal less to me than it should have. The subpoena wasn't the trap. The recycling order was. I found out 3 days later that the wrecked sedan, my evidence, still half-documented, still sitting in a garage bay I hadn't finished photographing, had a disposal order on it signed by the company's insurance division, effective that afternoon. I went to Bellamy's office to stop it and found Desmond already there, standing too close to her desk, saying words like liability and optics and 5 years is a long time to keep chasing ghosts. Bellamy, there's a data recorder in that car, I said, cutting through both of them. If it's the same kind that killed, I stopped myself. Too late. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Bellamy's jaw set. Desmond turned to me with an expression of manufactured concern so smooth it made my skin crawl. "Careful with theories like that," he said, "especially from someone the family's known for 4 days. It could look like you're building a story to justify your new salary." He looked at Bellamy. "You should ask where she was, exactly, the night of the crash. Convenient, an unemployed mechanic on that exact stretch of road." "I was driving home," I said, "from being fired. You can check the timestamp on my termination email if you'd like a laugh. I'll check everything," Desmond said pleasantly, and left, and the pleasantness was worse than any threat would have been. Bellamy didn't defend me. Not out loud. Not then. She stood at her window with her back to both of us, shoulders set in a line I'd come to recognize as the wall going back up, and when I asked if she believed him, she said only, "I believe evidence. Get it before he does." It wasn't a no. It didn't feel like a yes either. I went back to the garage with something sour sitting where the warmth had been that morning, and I understood, for the first time since the overpass, exactly how far I had fallen into a world that could close over my head without meaning to drown me. The data recorder was already gone by the time I got there. Not disposed of, moved. Someone had signed it out under a maintenance code an hour before I arrived, and the trail stopped at a name I didn't recognize and a signature that, when I held it next to a folder I'd seen in Desmond's office, matched close enough to turn my stomach. I didn't get to prove it. That night, the storm rolled in early, knocking half the estate's power out, and Gideon found me in the dark garage with a flashlight in my teeth and told me, flat, that there'd been a break-in attempt at the gatehouse an hour ago. Someone trying to get to the impound bay. Someone who'd run when the alarm tripped. Bellamy arrived in the dark 10 minutes later, soaked through. No bodyguards, no assistant, just her. And the two of us stood in a garage lit only by emergency strips while the storm threw itself against the roof, and something in the wreckage of the day finally cracked all the way open. 5 years ago, she said, not looking at me, my wife was driving that same curve. Corinne, she died before the ambulance arrived. Everyone told me it was rain and bad luck, and I let them. Because the alternative was believing someone in my own family had done it on purpose. And I didn't. I couldn't hold that and still function. So I stopped letting anyone close enough to ask me to hold anything at all. And now there's scoring on a break line that matches a case file I was never allowed to see closed, she said, and a mechanic who won't stop looking at me like I'm a person instead of a headline. Her voice caught once, the only time I ever heard it happen. I don't know how to not be afraid of that. You don't have to know how, I said. You just have to let me stay while you figure it out. I closed the distance between us slowly, giving her every second to step back. She didn't. Tell me to stop, and I will. Don't stop, she said. And when I kissed her, storm-soaked and grease-stained in a garage full of sleeping cars, her scent went warm for the first time since I'd met her. Black pepper gentling into something almost sweet at the edges, like rain easing off. and I felt it settle into my chest like a key finding its lock. We didn't sleep that night so much as exist in the same space until dawn, trading pieces of ourselves across the kitchen island like currency neither of us had spent in years. I told her about my father, a mechanic, same as me, who died under a car that should have been chalked and wasn't, a stupid, preventable accident that had taught me, at 19, that the world doesn't warn you before it takes something. I told her the wrench on my keychain was the last thing of his I owned, and that I'd carried it through 3 jobs and 2 evictions, because throwing it away felt like agreeing he was really gone. She told me about Corinne, not the loss, which she'd rehearsed for reporters 100 times, but the small things, that Corinne used to hum an old jazz standard off-key while she cooked, that she'd been the only person who ever called Bellamy by a nickname and gotten away with it, that after the funeral Bellamy had thrown herself into the company so completely that grief became a schedule instead of a feeling, easier to manage that way. My mother taught me that control is the only armor that never fails, she said. I believed her for 30 years. I'm starting to think she was wrong. I took the wrench off my keychain in the gray hour before sunrise and put it in her palm and closed her fingers around it. I don't leave things broken, I told her. Not cars, not people, if they let me try. Keep it until I need it back. She held it like it weighed more than metal. I don't know how to be someone's soft place, she admitted. You don't have to know that either, I said. You already are one, you just haven't noticed. For 3 days after that, the world was smaller and kinder than it had any right to be. Meals eaten at the same table without an audience. A car restored in the evenings with both of us elbow deep in the same engine. Her laugh startled out of her twice, rusty and surprised, like she'd forgotten she still had it. Gideon started leaving the room without being asked when we walked in together, which from him was practically a blessing spoken aloud. Then, on the 4th morning, the story broke. Icy Heiress's new assistant was on scene of suspicious crash. Sources say company funds missing to match. Desmond's face wasn't on the article. His fingerprints were all over it anyway. The article ran with a photo of me in stained coveralls beside a quote from an anonymous family friend suggesting I'd inserted myself into a grieving widow's life for money, and a separate, uglier insinuation that funds had gone missing from a maintenance account around the same time I'd been hired. None of it was true. All of it worked exactly the way it was built to. By noon, board members were calling. By 2, Bellamy's legal team was recommending my contract be suspended pending review, language soft enough to sound reasonable and hard enough to gut me. By 4, 2 security officers I didn't recognize were standing at the garage entrance telling me, with genuine discomfort, that I needed to surrender my access badge. I looked for Bellamy. I found her in the boardroom instead, behind glass, flanked by lawyers, her face arranged into the flat, unreadable mask I hadn't seen since the day we met, the one that had taken 3 days and a storm and a wrench charm to crack, gone as if it had never existed. She didn't come out. Through the glass, for one long second, our eyes met, and she looked away first. They walked me to the gate that evening, with my $400 worth of belongings in a cardboard box, past staff who wouldn't meet my eyes, past a garage full of cars I'd fixed with my own hands, and the last thing I heard as the gate closed behind me was Desmond's voice, pleasant as ever, saying to someone I couldn't see, "Some people just aren't built for this world." I stood on the wrong side of that gate in the dark with my box of nothing, and for the first time since the overpass, I let myself believe that maybe he was right, that I'd mistaken being useful for being wanted, and that the woman who'd held a stranger's wrist on a gurney like she already knew her name had let go of it the moment it became expensive to keep holding on. I didn't cry. I've never had the luxury of crying when there was still work to do, and my father's voice was too loud in my head to ignore. If you can fix what's broken. I called the one person who'd never once doubted me. Tony picked up on the second ring, heard 4 sentences of what happened, and said, "Get over here. Bring whatever proof you've still got in that head of yours, because I am not letting some silver spoon accountant erase 18 years of you knowing what you know." What I still had, it turned out, was everything that mattered. I'd photographed the scored brake line myself the night before it disappeared on my own phone, time-stamped, before any recycling order existed. I'd memorized the maintenance code the recorder had been signed out under, and 3 nights of restoring a roadster with Bellamy had put me alone in that garage long enough to notice something no one else had thought to look for. A second data unit, an older one, tucked behind the dash lining of a car that had sat untouched in that garage for 5 years. Corinne's car. Nobody had ever thought to check it because nobody had ever been allowed close enough to want to. I hadn't taken it. I hadn't had the right. But I knew exactly where it was, and I knew exactly who else did, because I'd seen Desmond's reflection in the roadster's chrome trim 2 nights ago, standing in the doorway of that garage bay, watching me work, for far longer than a man checking on his cousin's mechanic ever should. Tony's cousin worked in county records. Gideon, it turned out, still answered his phone even after I'd been walked to a gate by strangers, and what he told me in a voice gone tight and furious was that Desmond had been quietly liquidating positions in 3 shell accounts for 18 months, positions that would triple in value the instant Bellamy was declared unfit to run the company. A designation his lawyers had already begun drafting paperwork for, built on erratic behavior and a pattern of trusting strangers with sensitive company assets. Me, I was the pattern. "She's shutting everyone out again," Gideon said. "Board meetings in 2 days. If he gets the vote, he doesn't need her declared unfit. He just needs the seats." "Then we get to that recorder before he does," I said, "and I need you to trust me one more time." "I trusted you the day you looked at that wreck and said the word intent like it was a diagnosis," Gideon said. "I'm not stopping now." We went in at 2 in the morning, Tony driving, Gideon meeting us at a side gate he still had access to because no one had thought to revoke it, and I found the second recorder exactly where I remembered it, wedged behind 5 years of undisturbed dust in a car nobody had wanted to touch, because touching it meant admitting Corinne was really gone. My hands shook taking it out. Some kinds of broken you don't forget how to recognize. We didn't make it back to the gate clean. Desmond was in the garage when we turned around, not shouting, not rushing. That was the worst part, how calm he stayed, like a man closing out a spreadsheet. "You just don't know when to stop fixing things that aren't yours," he said. And there was a gun in his hand, low, almost bored, the way a man holds something he's rehearsed using and hoped he wouldn't have to. "Put it down," said a voice from the doorway, flat and absolute, and Bellamy stepped into the light with a coat thrown over pajamas and an expression that had nothing icy left in it at all, just 5 years of grief finally finding a shape to aim at. "Corinne trusted you. I trusted you. And you let a woman I love stand on the wrong side of my gate because it was convenient for your ledger. She's a mechanic, Bellamy. Do you hear yourself?" "I hear a man who murdered my wife," Bellamy said, and the words landed in that garage like a verdict, and tried to finish the job on me, and then framed the one person who actually looked hard enough to find the truth. I hear exactly what I need to hear. He raised the gun a fraction, and everything in me went very still and very fast at once, and I stepped between them, without deciding to, because some instincts don't ask permission, and Bellamy moved at the same second, faster, putting her body between the barrel and mine instead of the other way around. The shot went wide, into a wall, into metal, and Gideon had Desmond on the ground before the echo finished, and in the ringing silence after, Bellamy's hand found the graze along her own shoulder and came away red, and I understood the particular terror of watching someone take a wound meant for you. "Now we're even," she said, breathless, almost laughing at the absurdity of saying it while bleeding. I checked the wound with hands that had gone steady the way they always did in a crisis, pressed a torn strip of my shirt against it, and looked at Desmond on the floor, disarmed, furious, still talking, still explaining, and felt something in me go dark and simple and dangerous. Bellamy saw it. She caught my wrist, the same wrist she'd held on a gurney a month ago, and said, "Lo, just for me, don't. Let him answer for it in daylight, in front of everyone he lied to. That's worse for him than anything either of us could do here." I looked at her hand around my wrist instead of at him, and the dark, simple thing in me eased. "Okay," I said. Daylight. 2 days later, the boardroom that had watched security walk me to a gate watched something else entirely. Bellamy stood at the head of the table with her arm in a sling and the second data recorder connected to the main screen, and played, in front of the full board, the company's outside counsel and 3 reporters she'd invited herself. The recovered flight data log from her wife's crash 5 years prior alongside the scoring pattern from her own. Identical signatures, identical timing, identical account activity trailing back to Desmond's shells. I stood beside her and walked the room through the mechanics of it in plain language, the same way I'd explain a bad wheel bearing to a nervous customer. Because the truth doesn't need decoration to be devastating, it just needs someone willing to say it clearly. Desmond didn't get to interrupt. Security had already met him at the door with the county detectives Tony's cousin had quietly looped in 2 nights before, and he was led out of a building he'd spent 18 months trying to inherit, still talking, still explaining, until the elevator doors closed on the sound of his own voice. The room that had sneered at my coveralls sat in absolute silence when it was over. One board member, a woman old enough to have known Bellamy's mother, said quietly, "In 15 years, I have never once seen this company's chair let anyone else finish a sentence for her." She looked at me. "You've done something none of us managed. She's letting someone else carry the weight." Bellamy didn't answer that with words. She turned to me in front of the board, the lawyers, the reporters, in front of everyone who had once looked at me like grease under their fingernails, and said, "This is Wren Calloway. She is the reason I am alive, and the reason my wife's killer will finally answer for it. And she is the reason I remembered that control was never the same thing as strength." Her eyes didn't leave mine. I love her. I intend to keep loving her loudly in front of every one of you for the rest of my life. The room that had never seen her wait for anyone watched her cross it, take my hands in front of all of them, and ask, quiet enough that it belonged to just the 2 of us despite the audience, "May I kiss you?" Here, now, where everyone can see. "You may," I said, and she did, and the boardroom that had built its reputation on cold discretion broke into something that was, unmistakably, a cheer. That night, back at the estate, with Desmond in custody and the storm long past, and the whole house quiet around us, she asked me one more question with the same careful formality, standing close enough that her scent, warm now, black pepper, gentled all the way into something like wood smoke and rain, filled the small space between us entirely. "I want to mark you," she said. "Bond you. If you'll let me be your alpha in every sense the word allows, tell me to stop and I will stop. Tonight, tomorrow, always. And I will not love you any less for it." "I've been asking you to stay since the night of the storm," I said. "Ask me properly." "Wren Calloway," she said, low and certain, "will you let me claim you?" "Yes," I said, and there was no hesitation left in either of us, and when her teeth found the gland at my throat, gentle and sure after a lifetime of restraint, the bond that opened between us felt less like being caught and more like coming home to a garage light left on for exactly this long. 6 months later, the Vance Estate garage had a new sign over the door, hand-painted, slightly crooked, because Bellamy had insisted on painting it herself, and Bellamy, it turned out, was terrible at anything that didn't involve a spreadsheet. Calloway and Vance Restorations. My father's name and hers on the same board, which felt like the kind of ending he would have understood better than anyone. Desmond was serving the first of what would be a very long stretch of consecutive sentences: embezzlement and vehicular homicide and attempted murder stacked one on top of the other until the number stopped meaning anything except gone for good. Every account he'd hidden had been clawed back and, at Bellamy's insistence, half of it endowed to a scholarship in Corinne's name for young engineers who couldn't otherwise afford the tools of the trade, the kind of justice that builds instead of just punishing. Gideon still didn't say much. He didn't have to. He'd started leaving a second cup of coffee on the garage workbench every morning without being asked, which from him was a wedding toast. The wedding itself happened in early spring, small, in the garden behind the estate, Tony as my one insistent, loud, joyfully overdressed witness, Bellamy's board, the ones worth keeping, seated in folding chairs among cars we'd restored together. Bellamy wore her mother's ring reset into something that no longer looked like armor. I wore my father's wrench on a chain around my neck because she'd had it made into something I could keep close instead of hand away, and when she read her vows, she didn't recite anything prepared. She talked instead about a woman who'd pulled her out of a burning car without deciding to be brave first, and how she'd spent 5 years believing love was a debt that got collected in loss. Until someone showed up with grease on her hands and refused to let her keep believing it. "I don't leave things broken," I said back to her, the promise she'd carried in her closed fist since the night of the storm. I never said that was only about cars. We didn't rush the family question, but we didn't wait forever either. By the second year, there was a nursery beside the garage with a crib within sight of the workbench, because some habits, staying close to the thing you love while you work, turn out to be worth keeping on purpose. On the morning I'm remembering now, the one I keep coming back to, the light came in low and gold through the garage doors, the way it does at the very start of a working day. And Bellamy stood at the workbench with our daughter asleep against her shoulder, and my father's wrench glinting faintly against her collarbone, where she still wore it most days, and she looked up and found me in the doorway, the exact way she had found me on a gurney once, like she already knew my name, and was simply glad to finally get to use it. Being invisible, I learned, was never a life sentence. It was only ever a season waiting on the right person to notice, and once she does not stop. The end. If Wren and Bellamy's story stayed with you the way it stayed with me writing it, subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. I'd love to know. What part of this one hit you hardest? The night in the storm when Bellamy finally let her guard down? Or the morning she claimed Wren in front of the very people who'd once looked right through her? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. Until next time, keep believing the right person is still coming to notice everything about you that the world overlooked. I'll see you in the next story.